Hey, welcome everybody. As been mentioned, my name is Ron. I'm the lead pastor here at Vitalpoint Church, and I really hope and pray that you have been enjoying the gathering today. And my prayer has been is that you will get a better picture and understanding as to what does it mean to follow Jesus. And I understand that we're all at different stages of our journey of faith, and my hope is that this will give you greater clarity. I want to jump right in on our topic today because we're launching into a brand new season, a brand new year, and I want to give you what our theme is. But before I do that, let me just kind of unpack this for you. Each and every year, we believe that God is giving us a theme, and the theme comes through a phrase or a word. And what happens is that finds its way through the entire year. We spend a lot of time just seeking God and asking God about how and what he wants to do in and through us. And the theme emerges in the months leading up to the year. As many of you know, and maybe those of you who are new need to be aware of this, but there is a unique kingdom assignment we have as a church. And the kingdom assignment is to be a multi-site church that plants new sites in small towns in Ontario. And with that comes a lot of understanding of how we live into that. And the themes that we have for each year often support that and build that up and bring that to the forefront. But the piece that I love the most about these themes or these phrases that have emerged over the years is that it's not just for our church. There are people within the context of Vitalpoint Church that adopt these themes for their lives for that year as well. And we love hearing the stories of how God is working in and through these themes in people's lives over the course of a year. And it's just absolutely incredible. How they come about is important to understand. So what I do months leading up to the new year is I begin praying and asking God, what is the theme for the next year? And I step into that space on behalf of us as a church, and I begin seeking God for these things. And when I get a few phrases here and there, what I do is I start running it by a few people. And if it lands, we begin to pray and say, that's it. And we land on that particular thing. And he uses maybe a song or scripture or my prayer time or journaling time. And it's been just an amazing thing for us as a church as we discover what the themes are. So, many of you are at the stage where you're like, okay, Ron, just stop rambling. Give us the theme for 2024. Well, if you want to just start patting your knees and doing the drum roll, if you want to do that, some of you aren't doing it. Come on. I know you're embarrassed. Just go for it. Do the drum roll. Our theme for 2024 is unwavering faith. The word unwavering implies a steadfastness or a strong commitment to something. It also speaks of the firmness and the stability, but it also helps us understand that we're not to be tossed about by changing circumstances. To stay true to the future that God has for us as a church and us as individuals that make up this church, we need to have unwavering faith in 2024. Now, you might ask, okay, Ron, you kind of go before God and you ask God what it is that he has for us. But how did this phrase develop? Well, it started developing back in August. And it started developing in my time with God in the Bible. And I want to take you to this developing moment that God brought me to over the course of the months from August to this moment right here today and unpack it for you to help you understand where it came from. It actually comes from the Old Testament book, an Old Testament story in the Old Testament of how Joshua, the leader of God's people, had unwavering faith to take steps into creating their new future by crossing the Jordan River into the promised land that God was giving to them. Now, I recognize that even saying that for some of us, we're not as familiar with this story. Some of us maybe have a little bits and pieces of it. So let me unpack this at a deeper level. God's people had been enslaved in Egypt for hundreds of years, and God's heart heard the cry of God's people. And God brought this guy named Moses to come and to deliver God's people from slavery. It's one of the biggest kind of moments in the Old Testament where this showdown between Moses and Pharaoh and the 10 plagues. And it's this epic moment of this incredible thing that God was doing. This epic moment found God's people released from slavery from Egypt, and they were heading out to this promised land that God had for them. But in this moment, Pharaoh changes his mind and he decides to chase after God's people. And they find themselves in this kind of peculiar position. They have what is in front of them is called the Red Sea, and behind them they have Pharaoh's army coming after them. And you can imagine, we as human beings know what this is like, don't we? We find ourselves in these tense moments and we begin to complain or we begin to whine. And that's what God's people were doing. They started complaining that God had led them to this place to kill them and all these things that are going on inside of their heads. They even started blaming Moses, the leader, for leading them to this place. But there's this incredible moment that happens in Exodus 14, verses 15 and 16, where God and Moses have a conversation. It says this: "The Lord said to Moses, 'Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch it out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground.'" This is an amazing moment, a leadership moment for Moses and God. God says to him, "Hold your staff out over the water, and the waters will part, and the people will pass through on dry ground." Now, there's lots more to that story, but we're going to hit the skip forward button, and we're going to find ourselves now in the Old Testament book of Joshua. Because in Joshua, at the beginning, we begin to see a transition of leadership. Moses has died, and his assistant Joshua is now going to take over the leadership of God's people. Joshua has watched Moses. He has been with Moses. He's been with Moses when Moses spent time with God, and he is now going to lead his people. And Joshua even knows the condition of these people's hearts. But God shoulder taps Joshua to lead God's people to the promised land. I want to read for you Joshua chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, as we begin to set up more of the unwavering faith. Let me read it for you. "Moses, my servant, is dead." This is God speaking to Joshua. "Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses." God speaks to Joshua, gives him an assignment to cross the Jordan River. He gives him an assignment of leading God's people, but he also gives him a promise that he gave to Moses that he would be with him. Go over the Jordan. There is going to be another water crossing for God's people, and when they arrive on the other side, there will be opposition. This is for another time, and this is just a side note. Often when God leads people to new ground, as a church and even as individuals, we often face opposition. There will be challenges in front of us. Just because God leads you into something doesn't mean that it's going to be clear sailing. There will be opposition, but that's for another time. What God does with Joshua in this moment is he gives him 4 commands to be strong and courageous. But in the commands, he says this in verse 9. He says, "Be strong and courageous, do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." This is an incredible moment for us as we examine this story. The promise of God allows Joshua to have unwavering faith to move into the future. See, unwavering faith is not the absence of fear, doubt, or insecurity. It is anchoring ourselves on the promises of God's presence. This is our first big learning. Unwavering faith is not the absence of fear, doubt, and insecurity. It is anchoring ourselves to the promise of God's presence. We were talking about this past week in our Zoom prayer time on Thursday mornings at 6:30 a.m. Yes, that was a promo to have you join us on our prayer time. Even if you're not a praying person, you can still join us. You can leave your video off and be muted. What we were talking about is this, about the promises of God. God's promises means that God will never walk out on you. He will never abandon you. When God makes a promise, he is true to his promise. We as human beings, we break our promises, right? Sometimes we have someone that we love and adore that have made a promise to us and they let us down. Someone walks out on us. Maybe a husband or a wife has walked out on us. A mom or a dad has walked out on us. The reality of the promise of God is that he will never walk out on us. Even Christmas. We just came through Christmas. Christmas is evidence of God's promise that he will provide a Messiah, Jesus, to come and to provide salvation for those who believe in him, that he came to provide a way back to himself. See, God's promise is what we anchor our lives to. Courage and strength is not to resolve within ourselves to be strong and courageous. It is attaching ourselves to the promises of God, and the result is strength and courage. Unwavering faith says, I will attach myself, I will anchor myself to the promise of God, and a result of that is strength and courage in order to move into the future. For us, we must understand the reality of an unwavering faith attached to the promise of God. Well, you might say, well, what are the promises of God, right? You might say, I'm not even sure what those are. Well, I can give you three real quick. First one is Deuteronomy 31, verse 8. I will never leave you nor forsake you. This is God speaking to Moses and Joshua, and Deuteronomy 31 is recorded for us. Or you can even look at Philippians 1, verse 6, where God promises through the voice of the Apostle Paul that he will complete the work that he has begun. You want another one? Romans chapter 8, at the end of the chapter, nothing can separate us from God's love. These are promises that we can attach ourselves to, unwavering faith. Now, here's my commitment to you as a church, as the pastor of Vitalpoint Church. My commitment to you is to anchor myself in the promises of God. Because I know what can happen when I allow my fear, my doubt, or my insecurities to be the prominent voice in my life. I don't lead at my best. And so my commitment to you as a church is that I will anchor myself to the promises of God. So together, I'm asking you, will we do this together? Attach ourselves, anchor ourselves to these amazing things that God has promised for us. Now remember, unwavering faith is not the absence of the fear and insecurities and doubts. It's literally, they're not going to be gone. They'll still be there nagging us in the background. But it's saying, no. I want to be steadfast. I want to be unwavering in my faith. But there's more. There's way more to this. And I want to read a lengthier section for you in Joshua chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and then verse 13. I want to read it for you. This is an unbelievable moment for us. All right, so starting in verse 1 of chapter 3. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out for Shittim. I just wanted to read that section for you because I can say that word. And they came to the Jordan, he and all the people of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you should go, for you have not passed this way before. Verse 5. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua said to the priests, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. Jump down to verse 13. And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. You can only imagine what this was like. Word spreads like rumor on Facebook. They were about to experience something that their forefathers had experienced. They were going to cross the water, but this was different. This was completely different. Look at verse 5. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Unwavering faith is about anchoring ourselves to the promise, but is also about preparing ourselves for the move of God. I've been thinking about this for a long time and praying about this, and my conviction is this, and I need to share it with you. Consecration is the hard work we must do in order to be aware of the wonders of what God is going to do amongst us. Consecration is the work we do to prepare ourselves to be aware of the wonders of God. Joshua didn't ask the people to consecrate themselves so that God would do the work. He asked them to consecrate themselves so that they would know, see, and experience the wonders the next day. See it again. Look at verse 5. Joshua said, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will what? Will do wonders amongst you. This hit me like a load of bricks. Not that I've ever been hit by a load of bricks before, but this hit me like a load of bricks. Some might have been part of the moment going across the river, but they actually missed the moment because they were not prepared to see the moment. Let that land a little bit hard for us. Maybe that hit you like a load of bricks as well. It's so true, isn't it? The reality is some would have crossed the Jordan River and missed the moment. It's like you're standing in front of a sunset, taking a picture of the sunset, and you miss the moment because your face is buried in the phone trying to see the sunset. You miss the moment where God says, I have something for you. It's interesting. Often what happens for followers of Jesus, disciples of Jesus, and for churches is we think we're asking God to do things. I fall into this myself. It's like I pray, God, would you just use Vitalpoint Church to reach more people to encounter Jesus? God, use us to start more sites in more towns. Like we got 4 now, we're praying for 2 more by 2027. God, use us to help organizations like Forest Cliff Camp and Ally Global. God, use us to change the fabric of a town so that people will find hope and healing in the town from addictions and restore families. That's true, we got to do that. But here's my conviction. My conviction is this, and it's shifting, is that we need to learn what God is doing. And in order to learn what God is doing, we must prepare ourselves, we must consecrate ourselves so that we can see what he's actually doing. So consecrating ourselves is the prep work for the sacred purposes of God. What if it's all about what God is already doing and he's inviting us to be aware of what he's doing to participate in it? So for example, when you might in the past have heard me say this prayer of, Jesus, where have you walked through? What town have you walked through? Like what main street have you walked down and turned and inviting us to follow you? It's this idea that we want to be aware of what he's doing and we want to follow and join in him. So we're not doing, like, for example, this is just hitting me. It's kind of like we're not doing a case study on this particular town to see what the needs are. Yep. We'll look at those things, but it's Jesus, where have you walked? So we know you're already there doing something. We have to prepare ourselves. But let me bring it down to you personally. Let me bring it down to the ground for us, a little bit more personal. It's not just about the big moments. It's also about what I'm calling the mini moments in the day where God is doing something. See, if we live with the conviction that God is always doing something, then we must be prepared to see what he's actually doing and step into those moments. So, for example, it might be a mini moment in the day where a coworker at lunch opens up about some personal pain in their lives, and you are prepared for that moment, and you step in and you pray with them. Or when a friend at school confesses that they're self-harming, and you're prepared to sit in that moment and just hold their hand and love them and maybe cry with them. See, unwavering faith is the work we do to make ourselves aware of what God is doing. See, my fear is that for some of us in our lives, in our journeys of faith, we miss it. We just miss those beautiful moments of what God is doing. And even for us as a church, I don't want us to miss the moments that God is doing. But there's more. We got to keep moving. There's more to this. Look at verse 13. And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant, the Lord of the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of Jordan shall cut off from the flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. Here it is. The third big learning is this. Unwavering faith is the steadfast steps of faith into the future. Unwavering faith is the steadfast steps of faith into the future. When God provided a way through the waters of the Red Sea, what did he ask Moses to do? Stretch his staff out over the water, and the water parted. On this one, God asks his people to step into the water in order for the water to be held back. See, unwavering faith is not a passive approach to the year. It's a willingness to step into the things that he's doing. So, in essence, unwavering faith creates the future as we step by faith. The priests had to take the Ark of the Covenant and step into the Jordan River and allow the river to part before them. As a church, it's easy to not step into the water because we've seen what God has done in the past. This is what I think some of them were probably doing. They're like, we haven't memorized what God did at the Red Sea through Moses, and we're looking back, and that's a story we know and we can tell. But all of a sudden now God is asking us to do something different, because it's like, no. God works that way. But the reality is, whenever God brings something new, he always does it in a new, creative way. And we can't be trapped by the past. See, unwavering faith has the ability to hold the past in its proper light while looking forward to the anticipation of what God is going to do in the future. Now, what's interesting, when they cross the river, you can read this for yourself later, when they cross the river, they take 12 stones from the river and they make an altar, which means the altar served as a purpose to remind them of God's provision and power of the crossing of the river. It was not meant to trap them in the past. It was meant to help them live for the future of what God was doing. I think so oftentimes we fall to this trap, and we must realize that the past and the moving of God is there to inspire us to step into the water. Even when there's an uncertain future, like for example, like the river, the Jordan River right here was at its highest peak. This is the crazy part about it. God didn't wait until it was lower. God took them across when it was at its peak. Why? Because he wanted his people to know and the surrounding nations to know that the only way this future would become a reality is because he was in it. It's the only way. He waited until it was bursting. I think sometimes we get the wobbly faith because we fall for the traps of the what if yips, right? We have this wobbly faith because God wants us to do this, but my wobbly faith is the yips of what if it doesn't work? What if I step in and the waters don't part? What if I get too far up into the water and I'm going to drown? What if people think I'm crazy? What if the yips create a wobbly faith? See, an unwavering faith says, I will step with confidence because God has created the future and he's inviting me to be part of it. So, but where did it start? It started with consecrate yourself. Like that's where it started for these people. Consecrate yourself. What does it mean for us to consecrate ourselves today? Because some of us are like, do we need cream for this? Like, what do we do? So what is consecrate yourselves? Sorry, that's probably a little bit too much. Anyway, here's what I want you to consider. There's a few things. To consecrate ourselves today for this new year ahead as individuals and as a church. Consecrating means I must be willing to die to myself in order to know what God wants. Jesus talks about this. You can cling to your life. You can cling to the things of this world and you lose your soul. But he says if we die to ourselves, then we'll truly know what it means to live. It means that I must lay down all my dreams, my hopes, my aspirations, everything before God and just die to self. I must be willing to do the hard work. Here's the other one. I must be willing to do the hard work of examining my life to see if there's anything that's unconfessed that is keeping me from experiencing God in the future. We don't talk about confession all that much. Some of our Catholic brothers and sisters know this very well. We don't confess enough to each other and to God and to others. Maybe it's the confession of patterns in our lives that are hidden activities that don't glorify God. We need to confess those things. I'm more convinced than ever that part of the consecration is the consecration of our eyes, our ears, and our hearts. That we are to consecrate before we go to sleep at night and when we get up in the morning. God, I'm going to give you the sacredness of my eyes and my ears and my heart. Here's another one. A consecration is to live a simplified life in order to prioritize Jesus. I've been thinking a lot about this, and as you know, I share my thoughts on these things and teach on these things. I think the cultural consciousness right now is limiting our ability to consecrate ourselves because we're going too fast. We fill up our calendars. We get, I saw a commercial that over Christmas, they were advertising storage units to store all your precious materials, all your things. I was like, are we getting to this place where we're literally prioritizing pushing God out? What if we simplified? What if we slowed down? What if we allowed ourselves space to actually pray, to listen, to read scripture, to be in gatherings of worship together? I'm not trying to, like, when I grew up as a kid, it felt so pressurized to be at church, but I think even more so now than ever, we need to prioritize the gathering of community, of time of worship, of time of learning together, of time of being in space together. Why? So that we prepare ourselves for God. When this all started taking root in me, as God started revealing this to me last August, it didn't actually start with Joshua's story. It didn't. That's the crazy thing about this. God took me on this crazy journey for months. And where it started is in a section of the Bible where God planted something in me in 2016. It's Isaiah 54, 2 and 3. Enlarge the place of your tent, and let the curtains of your habitation be stretched out. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes, for you will spread abroad to the right and to the left, and your offspring will possess the nations and will people the desolate cities, or we'll call it towns. See, this was for God's people of old, but I believe it is for us today because it reveals the heart of God. That God's desire is to expand and reach beyond the comfort of what we know. This is the beauty of it. And the attachment to the Joshua story is they were comfortable and knew what they knew, but God was taking them to the future. We as a church, for the last few years, have been preparing ourselves for this moment. We have been strengthening the cords. We've been strengthening the stakes. We've been stretching out the fabrics. We've been working hard at the trellis of what our structure looks like so that we are better equipped to disciple people into following Jesus, that we're better equipped to lead. Our current board is doing an amazing job to strengthen the inner part of who we are. We've got accountability voices for doctrine and theology. We're growing in our confidence of inviting friends and expanding. Doors are being opened for us as a church right now. In the last month, 2 churches have reached out for help from Vitalpoint Church. Strengthen, stretch out the fabric, strengthen the stakes, spread abroad, for God is going to do something new. Unwavering faith is anchoring our lives in the promise. Unwavering faith is consecrating ourselves. Unwavering faith is a steadfast step of faith into the future. Why? Because God's heart is expansive and multiplication and reaching out. So I ask you today, will you have unwavering faith in 2024? Will you step into this moment and have unwavering faith? Now, some of us are like listening to this and you're like, dude, I was at Christmas and this is the first time I've ever been in church, and haven't been in church in a long time, and you thought you'd come back and now you're asking me to consecrate myself, and what in the world? Like, listen, understand this, that we know that people are at all different stages of processing faith at Vitalpoint Church. So I'm talking about what this might look like for you if you take a step of faith into a relationship with Jesus and then begin to grow into what does it mean to have unwavering faith. So take the air out of it. Just be okay. We understand that. But this is for those of us who call Vitalpoint Church home. Will you live from a place of unwavering faith? As we step into 2024, may we have eyes to see what God is doing. And may we step into those moments I was thinking about this. As the people crossed the Jordan River, they fixed their eyes on the Ark of the Covenant, which is an example of God's presence with them. May we fix our eyes on the true anchor, whose name is Jesus. For when we fix our eyes on him, we have unwavering faith.